Dark House Widowed. Mr. Sam Jones lived with his daughter-in-law and his 16-year-old grandson, John Glenn. A lot of strange things and superhuman things started happening in the dark house in August 1952. Mr. Sam thought it was a ridiculous joke. He informed the police, but what happened afterwards showed that it was not a joke. The researchers confirmed that the subject was not a joke. The researchers stated on September 22nd that the case required serious study. Grandson, John Glenn. Her day, John could convince his friend to spend several days with him in the same room in the dark house. As a form of encouragement for him to overcome his fear, and the friend was 18 years old, and half an hour before the night was restored, the two young men entered the bedroom and the observers prepared to monitor the phenomenon and follow it up. And when the light was turned off, the uncle of stillness, the sounds of loud throats and vibrations began until the two young men lost consciousness and entered, seeing many people entering the room, rallying in front of the room door and over the stairs. Father Stevens says the big table moved on its own until it went off the floor in the middle of the room. It was 6 feet high. And here grandfather told the table, "If you could hear my voice 3 times," and that's where the table started shaking and thwarting its legs 3 times in a row without anybody approaching it. Pastor Stevens completes his testimony saying, "The two guys were lying on the floor in the corner of the room, and when I approached the table so I could see the secret to her strange movement, she found it stationary. But some things moved on their own in the room again. Some things have moved over again. Little antiques have moved over the decorative table. It flew the air to fall to the ground in the middle of the room. Books, antiques, an alarm clock. And then the mattress flew over the table to settle upside down, and the drawers came out of place, and their contents were scattered on the bed. The pillow eventually rose from above the bed and flew into the air to fall over the young men's face. The grandfather was horrified, and in the event of a nervous breakdown, the two young men almost died, and there were those who pressed the pillow over their breath until the pastor cleared them. And he saved their lives and wrote in his report that he tried in every way to figure out the trick in the matter that was happening in Mr. John Glenn's house. But he didn't know what was happening, and after the pastor's visit to the house, violent and suspicious events rolled over. Violence abated at John's house, and one night a farmer named Crowther, who was from Runcorn, decided the man was one of the most dismissive of the idea of supernatural phenomena and beyond nature. Mr. Harold went into the room and ironically threw his coat at the decorative table. He said, "If you don't want the coat, give it to me." Strangely, the coat flew at him and hit his face, and repeated the act 3 times, and the same result, the coat flies to hit a strong head. And here the researchers looked at the two young men with a lot of suspicion, and the researchers monitored them fully, and every night the researchers searched them and searched the corners of the room for the source of the hoax. The two young men agreed and did not object to the inspection or the test. They had their hands and legs tied. One night, 2 scientists held John Glenn's hands and feet too, so that they could take doubt away from the old man and his ability to move things. And strangely, after that, something very strange happened. Everything was so shaken in the room. One other time the room was not lit, and the 2 young men were asleep, feeling nothing, but those outside heard very loud impact sounds, and when they showed the light, everything was up from the ground. And there's a toy box attached, and it was flung in their face, and the 2 guys were asleep and covering their faces. Here scientists confirmed that the 2 young men never meant to do any trick, and the room was free of any device that moved things, and make sure that what happens in that house is never human, it is a supernatural thing. And the scientists refer it to the naughty spirits that love fun and fun with the inhabitants of the dark. No one knew what the ghosts were doing until Christmas came in, 1972, and the phenomenon disappeared once and for all. But even today, nobody really knows what happened in that house. Haunted house. A true story of the most powerful horror stories occurred in an American district in 1860. A resident left for a new place as the house where he lived had been strained on him and his children. He had a wife and 6 male sons, and he actually got somewhere more than 900 kilometers away from his first place. And there he took over a large plot of land that had a group of men like him in the place trying to build it. They all decided to set up their own town as soon as possible. The man from a young age used to work hard. He had nothing to do with him as he worked day and night chopping trees, extracting firewood from them, and building a house for his children. Indeed, before the first year of his arrival, he was able to build a huge house composed of 2 doreen. And he liked to mix and talk to others, so he and his family were one of the most famous families ever. After completing the construction of his house, he found many requests from the rest to build houses for them, making it his trade. And then he manufactured more than one compound and made it a trade with his children to bring all the needs of the inhabitants and sell them to them. Thus, life flourished with him and his children, but not only planted all the vast lands around his house. One day he heard a strange voice in the cornfields, approaching the source of the sound to find him a great blackened dog with very scary features, as if he had been hit by an accident that shattered all his facial bones. The dog was proving his gaze at the man who was not intimidated by anything. He came a little closer to the weird black dog and then felt something strange inside himself. And finally he fired a gun into his hands and the dog disappeared from the front of his eyes to escape. When the man arrived at the place where the dog was lying, it was normal to see the corn and it was vandalized, but he found it ordinary in an intimidating way. I drew 1,000 question marks inside his brain about what happened. He came home, but he's in a terrible state. The beginning of the appearance of strange things in the house. He returned to his house, but he could not get his mind out of the cornfields before his eyes. On the same night at home, there were those who came and knocked on the door of the house. If any of the people in the house replied, they found him disappeared. This incident was repeated every night to the extent that they were swearing themselves to learn from the perpetrator, but to no avail. Anxiety confuses everyone at home until the second strangeness is accused, and that once they sleep, they hear someone sighing in a weak voice under the bed as if he were dead. And once they get their feet down on the floor to teach the source of the sound, they find nothing at all. All these things have been bothering them a lot and making life for their breasts heavy. And despite all the strange things they'd found at home, they never decided to leave. The man became a stranger. When he was a man who adored talking to others, he became isolated even from his homeowners. He always sat in his bedroom looking at a wall with a certain wall. One day, as his eldest daughter walked out to the courtyard to collect eggs in the basket as her daily habit, she saw a very beautiful woman from behind. The daughter went after her to learn what she wanted, but she found her whole body buckling about passing by, and despite the daughter's loud voice, this weird beautiful woman didn't pay attention to her. And as soon as she walked past, she found her beautiful hair slumped on her face to the point where she had not distinguished her features from close proximity. The daughter ran home and tightened it up from behind her, went up to the top roll to check the reality of the woman, and if she found it frightening, the features. Once the eldest daughter's eyes were in the woman's eyes, until she went crazy. She pulled her hair, cut it off, and threw it into the ground below her feet. Her sister ran towards her, and if she saw everything her older sister saw. The woman came to 3 of the sons who grabbed her and went to a giant tree in the courtyard and swung at her. The eldest son came to the house, and his sister pointed to him to show him what was happening at their house, but the surprise was that he could only see the woman and her children. One day, the father insisted on getting out of the house, and if his eldest son takes him in a wheelchair from his many aches and orders his son to head him to the same place as the strange dog. And there is a man who has had convulsions all over his body, which have been lean since the incident he saw. hands on something he saw in front of him, and his heart stopped flapping at that time. The whole house was a nightmare, and 15 years later, the children and the mother finally decided to leave it without returning. Everyone felt something wonderful about the house, as if it had become full of evil spirits that would only calm them down with the departure of the inhabitants, as happened with the father. They left him and left the whole place and went to their old house, and nobody knew if they had completed their lives normally or not.